A public space is a place that is generally open and accessible to people. Roads, public squares, parks and beaches are typically considered public space. To a limited extent, government buildings which are open to the public, such as public libraries, are public spaces, although they tend to have restricted areas and greater limits upon use. Although not considered public space, privately owned buildings or property visible from sidewalks and public thoroughfares may affect the public visual landscape, for example, by outdoor advertising. Recently, the concept of shared space has been advanced to enhance the experience of pedestrians in public space jointly used by automobiles and other vehicles. Public space has also become something of a touchstone for critical theory in relation to philosophy, geography, visual art, cultural studies, social studies and urban design. The term public space is also often misconstrued to mean other things such as gathering place, which is an element of the larger concept of social space. Public spaces have often been valorized as democratic spaces of congregation and political participation, where groups can vocalize their rights. One of the earliest examples of public spaces are commons. For example, no fees or paid tickets are required for entry. Malls, regardless of private ownership percentage, are examples of public space. In Nordic countries, like Norway, Sweden, Finland, and also Estonia, all nature areas are considered public space. Due to a law, the Allemansraten, if members of the public had no right whatsoever to distribute leaflets or engage in other expressive activity on government-owned property, then there would be little if any opportunity to exercise their rights of freedom of expression. In the United States, the right of the people to engage in speech and assembly in public places may not be unreasonably restricted by the federal or state government. The government cannot usually limit one's speech beyond what is reasonable in a public space, which is considered to be a public forum. In a private, that is, non-public, forum, the government can control one's speech to a much greater degree. For instance, protesting one's objection to Medicare reform will not be tolerated in the gallery of the United States Senate. This is not to say that the government can control what one says in their own home or to others. It can only control government property in this way. The concept of a public forum is not limited to physical space or public property. For example, a newspaper might be considered a public forum. But see forum in the legal sense as the term has a specific meaning in United States law. Parks, malls, beaches, waiting rooms, etc. may be closed at night. As this does not exclude any specific group, it is generally not considered a restriction on public use. Entry to public parks cannot be restricted based upon a user's residence. In some cultures, there is no expectation of privacy in a public space. However, civil inattention is a process whereby individuals are able to maintain their privacy. Within a crowd, public space is commonly shared and created for open usage throughout the community, whereas private space is owned by individuals or corporations. The area is built for a range of various types of recreation and entertainment. The physical setting is socially constructed, which creates a behavior influence. Limitations are imposed in the space to prevent certain actions from occurring. Public behavior that is considered obnoxious or out of character and are supported by law or ordinance. Through the landscape and spatial organization of public space, the social construction is considered to be privately ruled by the implicit and explicit rules and expectations of the space that are enforced. Whilst it is generally considered that everyone has a right to access and use public space, as opposed to private space which may have restrictions, there has been some academic interest in how public spaces are managed to exclude certain groups, specifically homeless people and young people. Measures are taken to make the public space less attractive to them, including the removal or design of benches to restrict their use for sleeping and resting, restricting access to certain times, locking indoor and closed areas. Police forces are sometimes involved in moving unwanted members of the public from public spaces. In fact, by not being provided suitable access, disabled people are implicitly excluded from some spaces. Human geographers have argued that in spite of the exclusions that are part of public space, it can nonetheless be conceived of as a site where democracy becomes possible. Geographer Don Mitchell has written extensively on the topic of public space and its relation to democracy, employing Henry Lefebvre's notion of the right to the city in articulating his argument. While democracy and public space don't entirely coincide, it is the pote